We accept the reality of the world with which we're presented. It's as simple as that.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a business, Mr. Beale.
Go on without me. Just go.
A good soldier never leaves a man behind.
Because I wouldn't give you 2 cents for all your fancy rules if behind them they didn't have a little bit of plain, ordinary, everyday kindness.
Life finds a way.
Welcome to Silver Screen Biases. Each week we pick a movie off of IMDb's Top 250 and dig into it. We're examining truth claims in critically acclaimed movies while also examining our own biases. I'm Nelson.
This is Jeff.
And this week we're joined by Pastor John Grandy.
What's up, John? How you been?
Hey, Jeff. I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. It's good to see you, man. John and I go back quite a ways. When my wife and I first started coming to church here, and you were the first people we connected with. And so we've had a strong bond ever since. And even though we're both geographically not together anymore, closeness wise, like we've stayed together and our cherish our friendship and stuff. So it's finally nice to have you on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking me. And I'm excited to be here and chat with you guys and have some fun.
Yeah.
And also, John was the youth pastor at that church when I was still in high school. Mm-hmm. And he had quite the impression on me. Mm-hmm. Gave me a going away gift of, I can't think of the name of it, but it's linked below. It was a book about a guy from the area. His wife died of cancer, and a year later, he set off on the Appalachian Trail. And I must have read that book 2 or 3 times, which for me is a lot. Getting through a book once is a big deal. So glad to have you here, John.
Yeah. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, where are you hailing from right now? What occupation you find yourself in? So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Born and raised in Michigan, southeast area, a suburb of Detroit, downriver area, for those of you who are familiar with Michigan. Moved to Ohio, and as these guys mentioned, spent time with them for about a decade there in Northeast Ohio, and then moved back 5 years ago with my family to be back near extended family for the kids. I have 3 kids, Noah, Lila, and Stella. We're trying for another one, so we'll see if Grandy number. We love just being in this area, being near family again. We miss them, being away, but I love to communicate, whether that's through writing or speaking, to just talk with people and connect with them. I love spending time in deep conversation. So I look forward to things like this and what we're going to do tonight. Also just having fun and talking about sports or, a different beer that we tried or whatever it is that is fun with different hobbies that we share in common, like we did when we, off screen before we started. Stuff like that. I love being outside. Michigan has beautiful country and the Great Lakes. And so Lake Michigan is my home away from home. I love going kayaking on the lakes and rivers in that area. Last year I went up to Sleeping Bear Dunes and kayaked on the Lower Platte River, which connects to Lake Michigan.
That's awesome.
Just
I bet you Noah loved that.
Yeah. Well, he wasn't with me on that trip.
Oh, okay.
So that's one of the things that I do once a year is get away by myself and just reconnect with God and kind of fill my tank.
That's fantastic.
So pray that the kayak doesn't flip.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
So
well,
those are some of the things that I love. There's a lot more, but we'll start with that.
Yeah.
I should probably mention my wife. I've been married to her for 14 years, so we have a great marriage, and I love creating a family with her, living life with her, and together, we're life coaches as well. We started a business in 2017 called Resilient Coaching. We've had the privilege of working with over 100 clients doing that, so it's been a blast through coaching.
That's awesome.
John, I don't know if you remember this. This is well over 10 years ago now. You had come to the church. You hadn't yet been hired. You were checking out the church to see if you were going to accept the position, I think was kind of how that worked. After we had our youth group sermon that Sunday morning, you were invited to do a Q&A. And one of the girls from my grade, because you had introduced Liz, and at the time you were dating. You weren't engaged. And you had brought along your girlfriend to a job interview, basically. And one of the girls was like, so why aren't you married? and you looked so embarrassed, but it made such a good impression on me. Like, because you took it like a champ. You were just like, well, that's kind of the part of the plan.
Well, you know what's funny about that is literally on our way home, we went to Jared. I went to Jared, and we looked at rings, and I bought one.
Nice.
So that's the crazy story about that.
Yeah.
He was with me when I bought it, which was not the plan, but we just found one that we loved. And then we went home, and I had to, gather enough courage to ask her dad if I could marry her. So maybe that question sped up the process. So I should probably thank that girl.
It may have, but also it's my opinion that at any point in a relationship, if the guy's thinking marriage and it surprises the girl, it was way too early.
Wait, what?
Good point.
Awesome. All right. Hey, well, as we do with all of our guests, we have 3 questions we're going to throw at you.
But I'm going to interrupt you right now, Jeff, because I want to talk about something else. I told John before we started that I'd give him time to prepare himself mentally for these questions.
All right. What do you got now?
I'm going to interrupt you for something completely different.
Okay.
Jeff, you and I, yesterday, we saw Oppenheimer.
We did.
And it is currently on the top 250.
As of right now, yes.
And because of what happened with Everything Everywhere All at Once, we're going to wait a year. But just, real quick, let's do the final 3 questions on Oppenheimer. Would you recommend it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you think that it's appropriately rated?
It's R, right? Yeah, it's rated R. Yeah, it's definitely, for some of the content in there, it is appropriately rated. The scenes that it was rated R for, if those 2 small scenes were removed, then it could definitely have been a PG-13 movie because of some of the content. Yeah, it's definitely R. It's not violent by any means. It's very much a dialogue, conversational driven movie, but it was incredible. It was emotional. It was suspenseful.
It's now been out for about 5 days
since this recording here. Yeah.
Does it hold up?
Yeah. So for the last 5 days,
I would hope so.
It's the best movie I've seen in the last 5 days for sure.
Right.
Okay,
John,
so I have a question.
Yeah.
Where would you rank it in Nolan's movies?
Okay, that's a great question. So there are 2 movies I have not seen of his, but initially I'd probably put it in the top 3. So my number 1 would still be Inception at this point.
Yes.
Then I'd have to say it would either be tied for second place with Interstellar or just above Interstellar.
Okay.
But Inception for me, because when I saw Inception in the theater as well, and that last scene where the top is spinning, right before it goes to credits, just the emotion that I had in that theater as and you're about to what's it? And then it just goes black. You're like you can't fabricate that.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a moment like that in this movie, even though this movie had a lot of the whole 3 hours was filled with great moments. There wasn't that just final nail in the coffin at the end for me. That was oh my goodness. This one kind of fully resolved and it ended the story in this way.
There is a fun twist still.
There is a fun twist
about 2/3 of the way through, but it was still a good
twist.
But
so I think Inception holds my number 1 spot, just because of the way my first viewing of that movie was at the end in the theater, and the whole crowd just went, and then so that was an awesome experience. So I would say it's either second or third in his movies, but it's definitely a must see.
Yeah. Quickly to go through my answers on those, I'd say yes, I recommend it. Warning: there is female nudity in it.
Yeah,
and it's not brief; it's prolonged and unnecessary. The story would have worked just fine without it.
Correct.
I think that even if you take out the female nudity, it needs to be R.
Oh, controversy.
Because of the subject matter. And also, you make it PG-13. 13-year-olds aren't going to come see this.
True.
It's an adult movie. Just because of what it's about.
No, I'm glad it was rated R just for the trailer they showed before it.
Yeah.
They showed
played The Exorcist Beginnings?
Yeah.
Believer. Exorcist Believer.
And it was
trailer.
probably the most frightening trailer I've ever seen.
I really hope that doesn't make it in the top 50 because I don't want to watch it.
Good Lord. That was horrifying. And we saw this movie in IMAX, by the way, to clarify. So The Exorcist on the big screen was not something. That's the one type of film that I don't like dealing with is spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
That's the one thing.
We did cover
we did cover the original Exorcist, and I think because it was it was so dated. That's what didn't make it as believable. But this one having the modern entertainment behind it and stuff, like the modern effects and stuff, like spiritual warfare is not something I like to mess with. So,
and then I'd say, obviously, like, a movie that's 5 days old, does it hold up? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say the biggest thing, though, is that because of what it's about, right? It's about J. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the Manhattan Project to develop the nuclear weapons. And so I expected this to be...
That makes sense now.
It makes a lot of dots.
Yeah.
I expected it to be slow, heavy. It is 3 hours breakneck pacing.
Yeah.
It is the most fast-paced movie I've ever seen.
Well, it's Christopher Nolan's directing that just and you've got Ludwig Göransson on the soundtrack again.
Yeah.
Like he killed it. Like,
if you were to make this movie paced at your normal biopic movie, it would easily be 6 hours.
You mean biopic?
Biopic, yeah. It'd easily be 6 hours.
Yeah.
Dang.
It's a great movie. Real quick, while we're on this, what's the most recent movie you've seen that's been like...
Actually, Noah, my son Noah and I just went on a Nolan kick.
Yes.
So we watched Inception and Interstellar.
Yes.
And I had to explain a lot to him, of course, because of how mind-bending it is. And he wants to watch Tenet, and I won't because I don't understand it. So I can't explain it to him, so I'm not doing it.
Yes. All right, we got some questions we're going to drill with you here, and then let's get into Gladiator. So the first question here, John, what's your political bias? How would you describe yourself when it comes to politics?
I plead the fifth. No, I'm just kidding.
That's the episode, folks.
Yeah. I would say I love this concept of the third way, where it's a
fascism.
What's that?
Well, Mussolini called fascism the third way. Is that what you're referring to?
Nope.
Okay.
We cannot air this episode now.
Like I really want to see another candidate who can find the middle between the extremes. Because I feel like the two sides are so polarized now that it feels like far right and far left, and there's not a whole lot in the middle. And it leaves me feeling really frustrated, especially as a pastor. You've got people in your church who vote both ways. And so it's very challenging to build a body of believers who have such polar opposite views and try to hold the tension. So even when we talk about the kingdom of God, we try to describe it as a third way, as a higher way that's above politics, that cannot be reduced to politics because it speaks higher than the views. And so I love dreaming about that. I'd love to see, the gap between the extremes get smaller and to find someone who can really find the middle and support them. So I know we still haven't seen that yet, but I think more and more this generation hungers for that. And so we might see a new political party or just someone who doesn't need a party, but we really believe in that person and their character and leadership, which we need a lot more of that because we have a leadership crisis, whether you're male or female or whatever, background you come from.
Male, female, or other.
Yeah. And so, I love to see a third way in the middle.
Yeah.
Awesome. Next question. What's your religious bias? How would you describe yourself when it comes to faith or, believing in things bigger than ourselves?
Follow Jesus.
Okay. Anything else you'd like to add?
Do you think it's that simple?
I think that we don't do enough research into the way of Jesus to actually ask, how would he have handled this? How did he model this? How did he treat people in these situations? I think that, we have our own default responses or reactions, and we don't often stop and say, how would Jesus have handled this situation? The other thing I would say is
they should make a bracelet.
Did you know that the What Would Jesus Do movement was started by Christian socialists?
Was it?
Yeah, it was very politically charged.
I believe that. Yeah. Well, I love what John Wesley said about that, how, there is no social change without personal change. And so
You're thinking of John Wesley Snipes, I think is what you're thinking of.
one of
John
those
Wesley
guys.
Gacy.
John Wesley Case. Yeah, no, that's
No, I had this thought. I actually had this thought today. I don't like arguing about whose dad is better. Like, my dad is better than your dad in
Right.
terms of faith, right? Like,
Okay.
your faith leader is better than mine in terms of Jesus, or let's say, Gandhi or Muhammad or whoever it would be. Yeah. Because that just feels like a losing argument if we argue that. I'd rather talk about my daddy is your daddy. Like, I believe that God created all of us in his image and likeness. And so how can we find our way back to him?
Yeah.
And what if we all have the same father? That's a much more interesting conversation, but it could still get into arguments, of course.
Sure.
But I think that kind of puts us on common ground to say, I believe God created every single person in his image and likeness. So let's talk about that.
A follow-up question from what you said, only because I know
Yes.
that I will receive texts, emails, and messages about it.
pages.
Your stance on universalism.
So I believe that Jesus is the only way to heaven, and personally, that's what I believe, that he is the way to the Father, and he said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And so, I appreciate that question, Nelson, especially for clarification of what I believe, and where I stand. Although I believe God created every person, I don't believe that all religions lead to God, but that God created every person and is calling them back to him. Like, we have lost our way from home, and he wants us to find him, and he's coming and looking for us. He's coming on a rescue mission.
Like
to
Liam
find us.
Neeson.
So, Jeff, are you saying
We are all taken.
Are you saying that the Muslims are taken?
And Liam Neeson's going to come
here's
find
another-
us.
No, that joke.
Another quick point about that. I think a lot of times in church, in Christian circles, we act as though the story of God begins in Genesis 3 at the fall, but it begins in Genesis 1, where we were made in the image of God. And that's what he is restoring us back to.
Yeah.
So it's a story of God who created people to restore his design, and the fall broke that, and we're on our way back to restoration. That's the heart of the gospel for me, and of faith.
Yeah. I mean, John, I've known you long enough to know that you are not a universalist,
Right.
But I know that for those that don't know you, your previous comment in isolation, right? It could lean that way, but I know that that's not the heart of what you were trying to communicate. So I just wanted to clarify. Thank you for that.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, today's movie. No.
Third question.
John, what kind of movies are you into?
Oh my goodness. It's been a day. Yes. Thanks, Nelson. Yes. How would you describe yourself when it comes to the silver screen, John? Would you have a favorite movie? Do you have a favorite genre? Do you have a favorite director? How would you describe yourself when it comes to movies?
I like all kinds of different movies. I think my favorite ones are the ones that make me think or are inspirational. And so, I mean, we've been talking about Christopher Nolan. He's definitely up there for me.
Yeah.
For that reason. Also, I just started watching a new show on Apple TV. I forget the name of it. It's about like a crowded room or something. It's by the director of A Beautiful Mind.
Okay.
And so it's a psychological thriller. And I love psychology. So any kind of psychological element that makes me think or, adds a twist, like A Beautiful Mind is a great movie too, in my mind, for that reason.
That's Russell Crowe, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah, that's Russell Crowe. Yeah. I have not seen that one, but okay.
Oh, you like it. It's good.
Okay,
Links
so
below.
Anything intellectual or psychology, I appreciate that. Do you have a movie or a genre of movies that you detest? So if that's the genre you like, what's ones that you stay away from?
Like stupid humor. Like I never saw Borat, and I don't really feel a desire to.
Yeah.
This is Nelson's favorite, probably.
I mean, Borat specifically, I don't care for, but like Wayne's World, Dumb and Dumber, Austin Powers. I
Well,
mean, sign me
but
up.
that's intelligent humor.
I got you. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
But like, actually, I don't know how you guys will feel about this, but Love and Thunder was horrible. I couldn't even watch it.
I
We
agree.
we
I thought it
agree.
was horrendous.
We agree.
We agree.
As much as I didn't want to agree with you, because I love Taika Waititi,
I do love Taika Waititi.
that
Yes, I
Love
agree
and
with
Thunder, Love and Thunder took too many liberties.
Yeah.
I couldn't
John-
finish it. It was that bad for me.
Also, another Russell Crowe movie.
Man, it was so bad I couldn't start it.
I left the movie theater so disappointed with that movie.
Yeah.
John,
Yeah.
this may have changed since last I knew you, because it's been a while, and I'm really bad at keeping in touch with people that are not in front of me every day. But you've always had a profound appreciation for movies that call men to be better.
Yeah.
And I remember specifically Braveheart and today's movie Gladiator are two that you talked about regularly.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's more in that vein.
Mm-hmm.
How would you define that genre, or like how do you, when looking for a movie, how do you evaluate it on that kind of spectrum? If that makes sense. I don't even know how to ask the question I want to.
Well, I mean, I would add this to the list, and this is definitely in my top 5. Cinderella Man, which is also Russell
Crowe. Yeah.
So there's a theme here.
Yeah.
But I just watched that with Noah too, which is fun to kind of invite him into some of these movies too.
Yeah.
What I love about that movie is, it's a true story. So you've got that real life grit that you feel in it. And Ron Howard did such a great job making it feel like compelling and inspirational. So I think it's that, like, I want to be moved. So when his wife comes in and says, "You're the champion of my heart," like that stuff just moves me, because there have been times in my life when, I'll just be real, part of my struggle in my life that I've overcome has been with pornography.
Yeah.
And my wife, in her response to that, her calling me out in the best way, like, "You are my husband. You can overcome this."
Yeah.
Just does something to a man's heart that is hard to describe. Not that she is like validating me in any way, but she is affirming who I am and believing in me.
Yeah.
And so when she does that in that movie, it makes me think of my wife, who has called me into affirming the man that I want to be. So those are the kind of movies that I love, they're inspirational. They feel real. There's something significant about it. Even if I can jump into Gladiator for 1 second, but
please do.
Absolutely.
Quote, "What we do in life echoes in eternity," is one of the best quotes ever, I think, because there's so much truth in it. Everything we do in this life matters for eternity. And that's the kind of life that I want to live. I don't want to waste a second, And so anything that kind of backs up my way of life, and even more so the way of life that Jesus modeled for us.
Yeah. Or challenges you to pursue it better.
Yeah. That I'm going to be on board for that. It's like trying to find these kind of eternal nuggets in movies. And another one I just thought of too, which the movie's okay. Also Russell Crowe. Robin Hood,
I really like that one, actually.
Rise and rise again until lambs become lions. Like these phrases that just stick with you.
Yeah.
And they inspire you.
I've linked below as many as I could find through Amazon Prime, the movies you've mentioned, because Jeff and I actually just set up our Amazon affiliate. So, guys, if you want to watch any of these movies below that John has mentioned, linked below, we'll probably mention some books as well. If you click those links, it doesn't cost you anything extra, but we get a kickback on that, and we really appreciate your support in that way.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into stats?
I would love to. Yeah.
Okay.
It'd mean a lot to me, actually. Okay, cool. 2000, the year.
Yeah.
In
Space Odyssey.
In which the movie Gladiator came out. 2000.
23 years ago. That's
23 years ago. Yep.
I know.
It's 2 hours and 35 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
It's directed by Ridley Scott. This is for us, Nelson, our second Ridley Scott journey.
Yes.
He did Alien.
Yeah.
It won't be our last.
Quick timeout on Ridley Scott. This Thanksgiving.
I was going to get there.
Okay.
You're jumping ahead.
Go ahead.
You're jumping ahead. Yeah. So But yeah, you're right. You're right, Nelson. So in this movie is rated R. So Ridley Scott, just a little bit about him. He did House of Gucci recently. He did The Martian.
House
Robin
of Gucci
Hood.
was him?
Yeah.
The Martian was him.
The Martian was him.
Martian's fantastic.
Yeah.
What a
And
movie.
also he's got 2 movies in the works that are kind of in line with what we're talking about. There's Gladiator 2,
Yeah.
which was in production up
Wait,
until
what? I didn't know there's another one coming out.
there's a
Yeah.
second one. Russell Crowe will not be in it.
That makes sense. He's very out of shape.
Spoiler alert.
He looks more like me
but
than he did with
there-
Gladiator 1.
It was in production before the strikes.
Okay.
And then the first trailer just came out for a movie called Napoleon.
Yeah.
This is a
Joaquin
biopic
Phoenix.
about Napoleon
Biopic.
Dynamite. And
No, not Napoleon
no,
Dynamite.
not Napoleon Dynamite.
Bonaparte.
That makes more sense. I was really confused.
It doesn't look like
Why-
Napoleon Dynamite at all.
I did hear they were making a second one though of Napoleon Dynamite.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. Yeah. So
No, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you got me all.
So-
cattywampus. Yeah.
yeah, so
They're
Ridley
making a
Scott.
sequel to Napoleon Dynamite 2, apparently.
That's just a few of the notables of Ridley
Yeah.
Scott. There's a lot
Oh
more
man.
that we could go down. He's very prolific. Some actors that are in this movie that we talked about. Russell Crowe, obviously we've talked about. We've mentioned a bunch of his movies already. Mostly recently, he did The Pope's Exorcist. Came out in
Yeah.
2023.
Not wild about
Not our
Exorcist
thing. He
movies.
was Zeus in Thor: Love and Thunder, Jor-El in Zack Snyder's Justice League, or the
Yeah.
original Justice League. He was in The Mummy. Being very prolific.
Yeah.
The next actor in
You
this.
named like 3 duds, but
Yeah, I
he's
know.
done so
Wait,
many
hold on.
fantastic
Isn't
movies.
he-
Hold on. What did I name that was a dud?
Love and Thunder.
Yeah, I know that one. Yes, we already talked about.
Justice League,
Get out of my house,
The
Nelson.
Mummy.
I've never saw The Mummy, but get out of my house. The Justice
Wait, hold
League.
on. Isn't he Zeus
Jor-
in Man of Steel?
He's Jor-El.
Or Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
You said-
Jor-El.
Oh, Man of Steel was good.
Yeah, and Justice League is the sequel to Man
That
of
doesn't
Steel.
mean it's good.
It is good. It has to be good.
Thor Ragnarok is good.
Yeah, but
Love and Thunder
it
is
was not the sequel. That was
Oh,
the
it's
fourth. That was the
sequel.
fourth goal.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
That was the
it's-
fourth goal. Anyways, next up is Joaquin Phoenix,
yeah.
who will also be in that Napoleon movie coming
Yeah,
out
he
this
stars
November.
as Napoleon.
But he's got a huge, he's the Joker.
Joker.
Yeah.
He's
That's it.
yeah,
That's all of them.
No,
Was this his breakout movie, Gladiator? I feel like it was.
It may have been.
let me.
I know he was Johnny Cash. He's done a lot of art house films.
No, Johnny
too.
Cash was great. Yeah.
Walk the Line.
Hold on. Let me
Yeah.
go. Let me look up here. What was his first?
By the way, the role he plays in Gladiator, one of the best villains I've seen because you just hate him.
I want to spend a little bit of time on this because he's
Yeah.
playing Napoleon. And Napoleon as a character is very much the same person as what he plays in Gladiator.
As Commodus.
As
Really?
Commodus? I think so. Because Commodus, more than anything, he wants power. He wants
Yeah.
to control. And he wants
Well,
the
He
love of the
wants to
people.
be loved.
Yes.
That's what's behind it. But you're right. It's through
And-
power. Through
And then and I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher this. What's Russell Crowe's character's name?
Amadeus Mozart.
Maximus.
Maximus.
Come on, Nelson.
Maximus has the love of the people, but doesn't
Yes.
want power.
Right.
Napoleon has the love of the people, desires power more than anything, gets it, and immediately becomes Commodus, immediately becomes a tyrant. And so I'm
Interesting.
really interested to see the Napoleon movie because it's very much kind of a
Let's-
mirror to
Let's go see in IMAX.
Gladiator.
Let's go do
Let's
When
When does that
Gladiator.
come out?
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, Gladiator was essentially his biggest stuff. He was in a bunch of small stuff beforehand,
Yeah.
but Gladiator was the big one. The next big one after that was Signs, the M. Night Shyamalan
Oh, yeah.
movie.
And
Yeah.
Brother Bear.
Yeah, and then he's also in Hotel Rwanda, Ladder 49, Walk the Line.
He's in a handful of IMDb top 250 movies, so he'll be
and
coming
then
back.
He'll be coming back.
And I suspect Napoleon will probably
Yeah.
be on the IMDb top 250 in a year.
So that's it for the notable cast, unless
Yeah.
unless there's someone else that stood out to you. But those are the big.
The Nubian slave, whose name I can't remember, but they refer to him as the Nubian. He's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
He's in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
Jamon Hansu.
Nailed it.
That's the actor's name. He goes by Juba.
Isn't he in Blood Diamond too?
I've never seen Blood
I
Diamond.
saw it when it came out, but it's been so long.
Let me check. I can fact check that real quick here. But as I'm looking this up here, then the only other notable thing that, as far as production goes in this movie, as far as people that were involved, Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack.
Oh yeah,
and Hans Zimmer is just a stud. Yeah, he was in Blood Diamond. I will say though, this was my first time watching this movie, which I'll give my reaction in a little bit. But like, some parts of this music reminded me a lot of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yes,
and that was also Hans Zimmer.
There is one song that is in both. I called it when we were watching it.
Are they the same composition?
Yes. I don't know.
Sorry. For Disney's Aladdin, the animated one, because the main theme for this sounds like Arabian Nights.
I don't know.
And when I first started watching it, I was like, did I click the wrong film?
Jeffrey, did I just hear you say this was your first time watching this movie?
It was. We'll break that down here in a second because
you're not my friend anymore.
I've clearly got thoughts.
So actually, while we're on that, one of the questions we like to ask, John, was this your first time? I know it wasn't. Do you remember your first time watching this movie?
Oh boy, do I.
Can I clarify what we're talking about?
Yes.
I don't remember. How old was I in 2000? 15? I was 15, I think. So I'm 38.
Then yeah, your math's right.
Yeah. So I was 15. My parents definitely would not let me watch a rated R movie probably till I was 18. So, I mean, I definitely saw clips in Wild at Heart weekends, from it. So I can't remember if I probably saw it before that though. So yeah, I don't remember the first time.
Okay.
The first time I watched it, I was babysitting for the youth pastor at our church, and I was not in the youth yet. So I must have been like 10. This came out when I was 8.
Oh my
I must have been like 10 or 11. And he said, after you put the kids to bed, there's my DVDs. Watch whatever you want that your parents would allow you to watch. And I was like, Gladiator sounds cool. So I watched that. So that was my first time watching it. I don't think I watched it again until I was out of high school. Actually, I might have watched it again in high school because of how often you talked about it, John. Yeah, and then probably since then, it's been at least 10 years.
Yeah. Real quick, before we get into this, then I want to just finish our stats here. As we record this episode, it currently stands at 8.5 out of 10 on the IMDb scale. It's currently ranked number 38 in the top 250. It holds.
Is this our highest rated film yet?
No.
Okay.
I'll get to that in a second, but it's 80% on the tomato meter and 87 in the audience.
Okay.
So that's all the stats I have. I know you have the budget.
Well, I have that, but I also have it debuted at 49 in May 2000.
Okay.
It dropped down to 177 by June 2005. And then it returned to 50 in December of 2013.
Okay.
It dropped significantly and then came back up.
The highest ranked movie we've done is Schindler's List, which was number 6. Was ranked at number 6 when we recorded the episode. So
this movie cost $103 million to make.
In 2000.
And there's been 77.2% inflation in the last 23 years, which would mean that this movie costs roughly $182 million.
For the scale of it, that's not bad.
They saved money by shooting on location and on time.
Mm-hmm.
They filmed it in the year that it takes place.
I don't believe that.
And then this movie is inspired by, but not based on, the book Those About to Die by Daniel P. Mannix.
Oh, yeah, Daniel P. Mannix.
The character of Maximus Decimus Aurelius, is that right?
Meridius.
The Spaniard, is a fictional character. The story is entirely a piece of fiction based as much as possible on the way we know, like basically all the cultural stuff in the movie is supposed to be as accurate as possible.
Okay.
And the weapons and the fighting style and all that stuff, but the characters and the story itself is an entire work of fiction.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Cool. This was my first time watching this movie.
Yeah, Jeff, I know that this excites you. This movie shares two cast and crew with our favorite movie of all time, A Clockwork Orange.
Pig in the City.
Aidan Harrington was an observer.
Oh.
uncredited
How do you get that
in A
role?
Clockwork Orange, and he was a Gladiator credited.
Huh.
And he died in 2017. Our condolences to his family.
Oh,
We enjoyed the 2 of his films that we
Yeah.
know of.
Hmm.
And then Bob
I enjoyed
Bremner-
one of them.
Yeah. Bob Bremner is an electrician and lighting technician, has done a lot of work in Hollywood, but nothing since Gladiator. And as far as IMDb tells us, he is still alive.
Okay. So yeah, this was my first time watching the movie. I had not seen it before. I'd always heard of it. I lose real quickly before. I always got this movie, Braveheart, and The Patriot always all mixed up.
Sure.
Just like these
This movie actually has at least one character that's also in Braveheart.
character.
One actor, sorry.
Okay.
Cicero in Gladiator was Morrison in Braveheart.
Okay.
The guy with the big face scar.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I just
Oh yeah.
Not that
I didn't
these-
realize that.
not that these movies came out at the same time or close. Like they're similar stories. You've got a guy who loses everything that overcomes everything. Like it's like just I always confuse them. So when people would ask me, "Have you seen Gladiator?" I was like, "Is that the one with Mel Gibson? Or is
Maybe.
that the one with the face on the page?" Like you're like,
Braveheart and Patriot are both about collective nationalist pride,
right?
whereas this movie is entirely about personal vendetta.
If you're talking about youthful Jeff, though, all I'm focusing on is
Sure.
a guy who lost everything going up
Yeah.
against the system to take
That's
it
fair.
down. So like that's the basic synopsis. Like it wasn't a movie that my parents watched growing up, so it wasn't one that was on my radar.
Well,
And then-
it wasn't out when your parents were growing up.
no, but my parents watched a lot of those movies my parents watched movies when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So it wasn't on their radar in the 2000s. I was living with them in the 2000s. So
Yeah.
so it wasn't on their radar, so it wasn't on my radar. So I liked it. It was very good, but it wasn't one that I had seen up until this point.
Yeah.
And it was one of the ones that I kind of felt like I knew enough about it though.
Okay.
That there wasn't really any surprises going into it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah.
Let's jump into some quotes and worldview claims and biases from the movie. John, let's start with you. What are some things in this that you think that this movie, whether explicitly or implicitly, is claiming to be true about the way the world is?
We're going deep right away, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
We do.
I think for me, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit, and I think it's important is the reality of spiritual warfare and how there are spiritual forces at work behind the scenes every day that are more real than what we can see with our eyes.
Mm.
And so I think that kind of the entry point of spiritual warfare is sin and brokenness, our tendency to choose, what is evil. And I'm going to pull in a quote here that is digging deep. And I want you guys to say this guy's name 5 times fast. It's from Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Oh, I've quoted him so many times. I love Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
You really?
Yeah.
Gulag
Archipelago.
Yeah.
Linked below.
So he said this: the line between good and evil runs not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart.
That's right.
And that quote is so true, because we can argue whether Commodus, is just part of an evil system or is evil from the outside in, but it really starts from the inside out. And it starts right in the human heart with sin and allowing sin to fester and grow. But here's the thing that you might not hear from other pastors, that I think it's not just sin, it's brokenness. It's not getting
What's the difference? What would you say is the difference between the two?
So there are different types of brokenness, or you could call it wounding. Getting something that you needed at the wrong time. So, for example, an 8-year-old who learns about sex, but they're too young. It's a loss of innocence. So you need to learn about sex, but when you're ready to learn about it. That is wounding. It's exposure before someone's ready. And that a lot of times happens with sexual abuse, where you learn about this too young. That also introduces another type of wounding, which is receiving something you didn't need that was damaging to you, something that was hurtful and was abusive. And then there's the one that I think is the most common, and that is not receiving something you needed. So, and this is Commodus. He did not receive the love that he needed from his father. And that drove him to do everything that he did. When I watched it this time, I realized how often he said, like, these people need a father and I am their father. Like, he was trying desperately to be the father that his father never was for him.
Yeah.
And he was constantly looking for love and he never received it.
This movie doesn't tell us anything about the relationship between Commodus and his father before the movie starts.
Right.
But I got the impression, and maybe you feel differently, that his father also deprived him of discipline. He seems a bit of a dilettante at the...
Yeah, he seemed like he was absent. Like he just wasn't there. Because he was off fighting all these battles, and he wasn't there. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, to finish the thought, I think that evil starts in the human heart, and then it grows outward into systems and empires. And so we even see this battle between, what is Rome, or what will Rome become? And Caesar wants to turn it back into a republic again, but Commodus wants to be a dictator and rule to try to get the love that he always needed.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Well, really, Commodus wants to continue the dictatorship because at this point, Rome's been a dictatorship empire for a long time.
Right.
Would you say that Joaquin's character and Russell's character, just because I can remember those names easier, would you say they're the opposite sides of the same coin? Like in with what you're talking about, this idea of this, just where they're coming from and like what led them to where they're at. Would you say that what made them different was the thing that also made them alike? Does that make sense?
Well, I like how Nelson said it earlier. I can't remember if we were rolling at that time, but that Maximus had the love of the people.
Yeah.
And he didn't want the power, where Commodus didn't have the love of the people, but he wanted the power. Right. So I guess it's almost like yin and yang more than two sides of the same coin.
Okay.
Yeah. To comment on that, who is the emperor at the beginning of the movie? What's his name?
Dad.
Emperor Dad says to Maximus.
It was I'll look it up.
So Emperor Dad says to Maximus that he must be emperor because he doesn't want it.
Yes, he does. That's precisely why you should be emperor.
That's right.
Yes.
So I've got two quotes from people not in this movie. Douglas Adams said, it is a well-known, he's the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It is a well-known fact that those people who must want to rule people are, ipso facto, those least suited to do it. Anyone who is capable of getting themselves made president should on no account be allowed to do the job. And then Tolkien, author of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, said, the most improper job of any man, even saints, who at any rate were at least unwilling to take it on, is bossing other men. No one in a million is fit for it, and least of all, those who seek the opportunity. So Commodus wants the throne. Yeah. And his father says that's precisely why Maximus should have it, because Maximus does not want it. In our governmental system, anybody that is nominated by the party, but they have to first announce that they desire nomination. So everybody by default that has been president of America, with maybe the exception of George Washington, has been president because explicitly they desired to be president. And both Douglas Adams, Tolkien, and Commodus' father would say, by that very nature, that disqualifies you.
If only we put that to heart now,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you figure out his name, Jeff?
Oh, so was it Marcus Aurelius?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, it was Marcus Aurelius. Yeah. So the dad, Marcus Aurelius, do you think that just from the little we know of him, having that insight on how he was going to choose his predecessor, do you think we can assume that while he was in rule, he was ruling respectfully? Or like, do you think like there was kind of this balanced system? Because we don't really, we immediately go into the focus of Commodus more, but we really don't see like what the tensions are before all this stuff happens. I mean, we obviously know there was a war, so there is fighting, to expand the kingdom and stuff. So he is going after to build the empire. But like, do you think he was ruling respectably because we know this of how he's choosing his predecessor?
I think that's a symbol of a symptom of how old age brings wisdom.
Oh.
But I mean, my position on war. These are wars of choice that the Empire of Rome is engaged in. To quote directly from the movie, just one final stronghold stands in the way of Roman victory and the promise of peace throughout the empire. The only reason they don't have peace is because they're constantly expanding their borders.
That's right. They're choosing to not have peace. They're
choosing war.
Yeah.
And then, as Maximus says to Marcus Aurelius, there's always someone left to fight. And Marcus Aurelius says, how can I reward Rome's greatest general? And he says, let me go home. Like, he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to be fighting.
Yeah.
He's right. The only reason he's fighting is because Marcus Aurelius wants to fight. So I would say that, no, him choosing Maximus as his predecessor, no, not predecessor, his
successor,
thank you.
There it is, yeah.
Does not absolve him of the sins of expansionary ambition wars.
Okay.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think he's at the point where it's kind of like the last identity crisis before you die. What kind of legacy did I leave?
Yeah.
And you see that tension and that struggle in his character. I thought that actor did such a great job because you could see the struggle even between him as the philosopher and him as the warlord tyrant. Like you have this very polarizing difference inside of him of wisdom and what really matters about life. Why did we fight all these wars? Like in these conversations he has with Maximus, you see more of his heart and like, can we just talk as friends? That one point where he's like, tell me about your family. And honestly, in that moment, he almost seems jealous of Maximus.
Yeah.
He's like, I wish I would have spent more time with my family.
Yeah. So we've talked about this in past episodes because both Jeff and I struggle with, and I'm sure John, you can relate to this as well, especially because what we do what was the line?
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
I think that really does an incredible job of capturing something that all men struggle with, is this idea of, I want to be remembered past my death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Scripture explicitly tells us you are in an incredibly fortunate position if you can live a quiet life. Mm-hmm. If the only people that remember you when you die are the people that knew you, you're actually kind of in a really fortunate position. And I think that also echoes in eternity, but it's an eternity not of this world, right?
Yeah.
Where most people are looking for that worldly echo in eternity. We're looking for legacy. We want 100 years from now, people to know our name.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just vanity.
So I actually preached on legacy recently. If you want to link to it, it was a whole sermon on the legacy of Jesus. Like, what if we all think about legacy, but what kind of legacy did Jesus leave?
Yeah. You commented on Marcus Aurelius being a philosopher. In the conversation he has with his son says to him, you wrote me a letter talking about the 4 chief virtues: wisdom, justice, fortitude, and temperance.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at those 4 things, Marcus Aurelius's expansionist wars rule out all of them. They were unwise. They were unjust. I suppose they did show fortitude of a sort, but they didn't show any kind of temperance.
That's you being optimistic, Nelson.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. And then his son says, but I have other virtues.
Yeah.
Ambition, resourcefulness, courage, and devotion. And I think all 4 of those really tie in well to this idea of expanding the empire.
Interesting.
I think that his son is... I think that Marcus Aurelius's issue is not... It maybe isn't so much that he sees his son as improper for the throne, but that he sees himself too much in his son. He says to his son, your faults as a son are my failure as a father.
Yeah.
I think maybe there's a chance that what he fears is his son would be the tyrant that he knows he was. So,
yeah, good insight. And then even to carry that further, so if Commodus represents his younger self, his daughter represents who he is now.
yeah, one of the things he said to his daughter was, "You would have been strong. I wonder, would you have been just?"
Yeah. And then he says, "If only you were born a man," which I think is the weirdest quote of the whole movie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
like, I wish you could lead.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. One thing he says in that conversation with his daughter, 4 years of peace in 20. And for what? I brought the sword and nothing more. It's like he recognizes his role in tyranny, but like, I don't know, for me and for my political biases, like too little too late, man. Like you've wreaked havoc on the world with it for the 20 years you reigned.
Yeah.
You've impoverished your own nation.
There's blood on your hands.
There's blood on your hands. And all for what? To make your name echo through eternity.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So what should echo in eternity?
Well, it depends which eternity we're talking about, right? Like, are we talking about the true and real eternity of our souls past the grave? Or are we talking about the worldly eternity of
once we've passed?
Once our physical bodies have died. Right? If we're talking physical bodies, nothing but ruthless ambition. That's what's going to echo through eternity. But if we're talking past our souls past the grave, like it's going to be humility. It's going to be grace. It's going to be the values of
selflessness.
Selflessness. It's going to be values of the kingdom, not of the kingdoms of this world.
I had that bumper sticker.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Not of this world?
Yeah, no. Yeah. Man.
I've been soapboxing a bit. What do you think, John?
Well, so Maximus is the one who says that, right? And he lives his life according to kingdom virtues of sacrificial love, courage, love for his family.
I mean, we also do meet him though as he's leading a battalion in war. So like there are some, I mean, like within what we're talking about, there are some questionable areas of even his character of just like he's obviously not anti-war, or maybe I guess, or maybe we don't know. Maybe he was in that position not by his own choosing. Maybe they had he had to be, what's the word? Enlisted or something. Yeah, it's like, but just like he clearly had no problem taking a life in the war. Like, so like he was not without flaws. So I don't think like he was a character that was presented on a pedestal to where like no shame, no flaws, no blemishes. Like, I don't know. So yeah, I kind of, there's kind of that duality of that as well. Yeah, we do see like all he's fighting for is to get home with his wife and his son. Like that's what he's fighting for, and that's what he's, even after his family has passed, he is fighting for just this idea of just to be free, and for him, freedom is to be reunited.
Right.
Even within that, there's a point where he has a death wish, but like his own instinct won't let him die.
Right.
Until he finds out that by succeeding here, he might be able to come face to face with Commodus.
Yeah.
And have his revenge.
Yeah. So so I do think there's a lot you can take from Russell Crowe's character as far as like things we can apply to our lives, like how we don't really ever see him father. No. we don't see him as a father. We see him as a father who lost his child. Like we don't see him as a husband. Like we see him as someone who lost his spouse.
Right.
Like, so there's a lot of aspects that are still like, maybe he wasn't around home much, when his son was around. It's just, we're assuming a lot because of the character we see him show through his time in the rings.
Well, and I might be mistaken, but Rome
wasn't built in a day.
It wasn't.
Yes.
But also it didn't conscript its soldiers.
Okay, so he was choosing to be in the military
for a salary. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was good at it.
That was the question I had was, did they have a choice or were they just drafted?
I may be mistaken about this era of history, but my understanding is at this point in Rome's history, they did not yet conscript soldiers.
I don't think there was any dialogue in this movie discussing his enlisting or...
No. He did have a tattoo of SPQR, which he removes. And this was a really interesting conversation, in my opinion. It really fed into my biases as a Christian anarchist.
What did the tattoo mean?
He's scarring this SPQR tattoo. SPQR stood for Senatus Populusque Romanus, which translates to the Senate and the people of Rome. But the Numidian says to him, "Is that the sign of your gods?" And he nods. And he says, "Will that not anger them?" And he nods again and laughs this time. I think Christians in America, far too often, we create an idol out of the flag, out of the state. So when he says, "Yes, these are my gods," I don't think he's entirely being facetious. I think he's acknowledging, yes, I created an amount of importance on this that was improper. He's not a Christian. We know that. At least it wouldn't have been likely for him to have been a Christian at this time. Roman soldiers that became Christians became deserters and were crucified for it.
And he worships his ancestors.
Right.
I mean, he has those little models of them, that he prays to.
Yeah. At one point, he makes a prayer, "Blessed Father, watch over my wife and son." But it's unlikely that he's talking about the Judeo-Christian God.
Right.
I think that right in there, that scene, I think that that's way more important than I caught the last couple times I watched it. Right? Like, this is like a big theological claim that if you're not careful, the state can become a god to you. Right? You're looking to it for protection. You're looking to it for glory. You're looking to it for purpose. You're looking to it for morality,
vindication, justification, and things like I did it for the flag. It's.
Well, and in church history, this is appropriate because it involves Rome.
Yeah.
As soon as the church sided with Constantine or mixed blood with Constantine, the hell started breaking loose in the church. Yeah. And at first it seemed like a good thing. Like Constantine helped with, some of the early church writings that united the church and prevented it from splintering at that point. But then the corruption started, and we have the history with corruption in the Catholic Church. And at one time they didn't even know who the legit pope was. There's like 3 or 4 popes at once. And it was all about power and money and corruption.
Well, if we can find it just to American history, right? Like Jefferson thought it was really important that we have a separation of church and state. And in his opinion, it was to protect the church, not to protect the state.
Right.
And he wasn't even a Christian. And then later, the state offered tax incentives to the church to become intertwined with the state. And we saw in 2020 how that got leveraged against churches. Hey, if you won't close down, we'll remove your tax exempt status. Right? Or now that you're dependent on the state through tax exemption, hey, let us define what marriage is now. Things like that. Like, I think that the church has abdicated a lot of responsibility. Sorry, Jeff, I cut you off.
I was just going to say, I looked it up. Like, the movie takes place approximately AD 180, so it's about 150 years post Jesus' crucifixion stuff. So I mean, there would still at this time, if we're getting theological about it, there would potentially still be like churches just being ignited at this time.
Yeah, it still would have been illegal to be a Christian in Rome.
Yeah,
because Maximus Aurelius was the god king.
Yeah.
To worship anybody other than him would have been treason.
So Jesus was still pretty fresh.
John, do you know off the top of your head when Constantine was? I think 300 AD.
I was just Googling it. AD 280 to 337. Okay. So he came 100 years after this.
And at that point in Roman history, Christians made up for 50% of the empire. So some people say Constantine made Christianity. I think Christianity made Constantine. He hitched his wagon to what was now 50% of the empire.
Well, it was kind of a feedback loop at that point where they mutually helped each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, until Constantine, we saw soldiers becoming deserters and getting killed for becoming Christians. And Constantine says, no, you can do both, right?
Yeah,
and really subverted the gospel in some ways there.
Yeah, so I do want to make one more comment on this in terms of how it relates to us in America. This would be a whole podcast on itself, but Christian nationalism, which is the adding together of the church and the state without even realizing it, And our lead pastor today said something, and it made me think of a formula that's kind of humorous and offensive. That the church plus the state equals megachurch. Because so often megachurches are about power and money and success.
Okay.
And it's not about becoming like Jesus. Now, I understand that's a blanket statement.
Sure. There's exceptions. Yeah.
There are a lot of mega churches that are great and they care about Jesus, and they will.
And there's small churches that are bad on this as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But and he worked at a mega church before, and he was like, the goals and functions of a mega church are antithetical to the way of Jesus. Like the way that Jesus constantly tried to get out of the spotlight, escape the crowds, be alone with the Father. He cut his church in half about 5 times until only 2 people followed him at his death. He said, drink my blood and eat my flesh, and didn't really explain it.
Yeah.
So they think he's talking about cannibalism. So, we need to clarify here. I'm not saying that all megachurches are bad. Sure. I'm not saying that they all are anti-Jesus.
Or that being small makes you holier.
Exactly. Yeah. But are we truly following the way of Jesus, or is there something about the system of the church that has been so co-opted by the state or even capitalism, right? Where so often
you've triggered
the
me.
pastor is positioned as a CEO. What's that?
I said you've triggered me.
It's like Pee Wee Herman. You said the magic word. Capitalism.
But the pastor seems to be more like a CEO than Jesus, than a shepherd. And I think that's a big problem. And actually we have seen the fall of that with pastors in America. I mean, how many pastors do we know who have fallen big time? And many of them operate in a CEO model.
Only one that I can think of.
Bill Hybels in Willow Creek is a big one, but there are many others.
Yeah.
Are you being facetious?
I was being facetious, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, that could be a whole other podcast, but I do think that I remember being in seminary about church history. It was a church history class, and I hadn't learned a lot of this yet. And the professor, when we got to Constantine, she asked us, was it a good thing or a bad thing that Constantine went in bed with the church pretty much?
Yeah. And
I naively said, well, I think it's a good thing because all these things happened. And then the whole rest of the class, I regretted my statement because I saw all the dangerous things that happened because that door was open.
What would have been a more interesting third way would have been to say it was God ordained regardless.
God ordained or God allowed?
What's the difference?
Free will.
Well, here's a whole can of worms for another whole episode.
Are we going to get into the Calvinist Arminian debate?
I think that's outside the scope of what's being claimed in this movie. I lean more towards Calvinism. In fact, my brother-in-law is let me get his exact wording. Meticulously ordained, I think was the words he used. He's what the other theological term would be determinist. Yeah. The only difference between determinism and fatalism is that with fatalism, it's a naturalist explanation, whereas with determinism, it's because God said so. And basically, the most succinct explanation for it would be, what possibly can you do that would surprise God? I struggle with this. I've not come to a conclusion on where I stand on this.
Yeah.
But that argument, what can you do that would surprise God? Like that's one that I don't know. I have no answer to that. And so with Constantine, as much as I think that Constantine took advantage of the populist movement of Christendom, which was now 50% of the empire, I think it was a political choice. I think that the state was an incentive for him to do that he did a lot of things that up until that point was not associated with Christianity. Like, for example, as I mentioned earlier, if you were a Christian prior to Constantine, you could not be a soldier. That's how pacifist they were. In America, obviously, we have a very different opinion on that. So, yeah, to get back to the Arminian Calvinist argument, I don't have a flag in the sand on that. I lean towards Calvinism. I think those arguments are more compelling. But man, do they
I
make
would
me
agree with the
uncomfortable.
opposite. That, again, this is another podcast.
Yeah. The conclusions of that discussion make me uncomfortable, but I lean toward it.
Yeah.
Kind of a segue into the next little topic
Yeah.
here. Like Maximus says a line, nothing happens to anyone that he is not fitted by nature to bear.
Mm.
And I remember as a kid who grew up a Christian, you know, like there was always that line growing up that I'd heard that I don't necessarily agree with anymore, but it was like, Jesus isn't giving you anything you can't handle.
Yeah.
And as a kid, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like, okay, the situation I'm in, like, yeah, no, I'm meant for it. But like, I think there's more depth to it than just that line. But like that line struck out to me. That's a common line that people say as Christians nowadays is like, you haven't been given everything you can't handle.
Right.
But I do think that's not a direct representation of what God allows.
John, do you want to give us your pastoral response to that?
Yeah. So I was thinking of Psalm 139, verse 13, which says, you made all the delicate inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous. How well I know it. You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion, as I was woven together in the dark of the womb. You saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed.
Amen. Was that off the top of your head, or did you read that?
I just read it. You're like, I'm impressed.
Yeah.
Of that.
Like, John, goodness gracious, well done.
Yeah. I should have lied and said I remember it. No, you can't do that. This kind of gets into the nature nurture argument, right? Like, are we the product of our environment, or is it the way we were designed? And I think the answer is yes. There's always nature and nurture involved in how we are developed and how we react to these situations.
Yeah.
But I think Maximus is leaning towards the nature piece of this, where there is a design that equips people to, in language I would use, fulfill their calling. And we see this in Psalm 139. So I do think that nature is compelling in that God hardwires us to fulfill the calling that he has given us. And so that would be the Christian language for what Maximus is saying. And so I would agree with him, but he almost says it more of like a universalist kind of perspective, where I would say it in terms of, you know, God has designed us to fulfill a destiny. You know, he has equipped us to fulfill our calling. And I do think that it's much more strategic than we give God credit for. And I think it's fascinating.
And what would you say to the kind of Christian culture not found in Scripture, but often repeated? God will not give you a problem that you can't. How is it often worded, Jeff?
God doesn't give you anything you can't handle.
Yeah. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is actually a misquote of actual Scripture, and so I'm trying to remember where that source is.
I can't remember where the misquote is from.
I just said
but
it.
I know it's not in Scripture.
It was me. I said it. Jeff misquoted it.
I think you'd probably agree, John, that yes, absolutely, God will allow you to be tried more than you can in your own flesh handle.
You see that throughout the whole Bible.
You see it throughout Scripture.
Yeah.
And also, I think that Christian culture line is a huge disservice, because oftentimes, when I still believe that was true, if I failed a trial, it ate at me. I was like, well, God allowed me to do it and I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
When really the answer is, no, I can't handle this, and so I should have relied on God.
Right.
The guilt I should feel is not so much for having failed the trial, but for not having relied on God in that moment.
Yeah, so this is 1 Corinthians 12 and 13. If you think you are standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And here it is. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you're tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. So I think the key here is he will show you a way out, right? So the focus is not on buck up, buttercup, and be strong in your own strength. It's rely on him, and he will show you a way out.
Amen.
Preach. I just had one other minor quote here from Juba that
the Namibian.
He's talking to Russell Crowe's character, and I think it's after the first successful gladiator battle. He goes, "You have a great name. He must kill your name before he kills you." And it's a minor quote as far as like some of the things we've already talked about, but just I think it goes back to it reiterates that idea of like you need like change your identity. You need to become something new to accomplish your next goal. Like this whole like you can't accomplish what you're setting out to do by the name you're currently going under. Like something like that. Like you have to lose part of yourself to win part of you. Like I think there's a lot in that, just that simple line of going like everything changes from this here out. Like your identity changes from now on. Like
is that when he adopts the moniker the Spaniard? Or was that given to him by the crowd?
So I see it differently, Jeff. I think what he's saying is your name is so strong and means so much that it's going to overpower Commodus. Like even if he kills you, he can't kill your name.
Oh.
And we see that throughout the movie. So this is one of the things that stood out to me this time watching it was when he first is known in the gladiator, ring in the arena, they call him Spaniard, which is calling out his home country where he comes from,
right.
How he's known to the masses. And then I love the scene when he's in the cage with the men and they're both on each side of it sitting down and he's walking back and forth and they call him General.
Yep.
So that they see who he was, his profession, his expertise. They call him the General. And then when he reveals himself to Commodus, he says, "My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next." Now that's his name. That's unleashing his name. And you start to hear the crowd begin to chant Maximus.
Yeah.
The crowd says Spaniard. Then they never say General. He's only known as General to his men. But then once he reveals his name, the crowd chants Maximus. And actually, Commodus's son, remember when he's playing gladiators and Commodus thinks he's another famous gladiator and he says, "No, I'm Maximus. Yep. I'm the savior of Rome."
Yeah.
And so I think what his friend is telling him is Commodus can't, even if he kills your body, he can't kill your name and what that represents.
No, that I would absolutely agree with that, seeing it in that perspective. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
I have converted you.
I have just converted. The conversion of Jeff.
I think that Maximus's story arc is really compelling, and this is why the movie has connected with me so much is and this is where we even get into the hero's journey, which we don't have time for that, but we see the hero's journey clearly in Maximus's story. Absolutely. Where he has to go down into the pit and die, which, by the way, the ultimate hero's journey is Jesus. And I think that the reason why hero's journey resonates with so many movies is because it is a reflection of the biggest story.
Absolutely.
The story that's written on our hearts about the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so we don't realize it, but we have a longing to fulfill that bigger story. Even Hollywood directors do, and they don't realize it. Yeah. And they're telling God's story without knowing. So I think that's fascinating. But to see him like face the death of his family and like want to give up and choose to dig in and find a bigger purpose that's bigger than himself. I have drawn so much strength for that in my own hero's journey. Because I think that we need to think about, like, we are each on a hero's journey. We each need to walk through this pathway of all the stages of it. And you should probably link to it just for reference for people. But, like, and you guys have talked about it before, right, on the podcast, the hero's journey?
Yeah, I think we discussed it in
roundabout way.
In one of the Star Wars episodes, because it really shows up in the Star Wars trilogy. But there's so many, like you said, there's so many movies where the hero's journey.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through the steps of the hero's journey real quick?
Yeah, actually, I have Maximus's journey through
Great.
it. So do you want me to do that?
That'd be great.
So the first stage is the ordinary world, and this is where Maximus serves as a general under the Roman Empire and leads the Roman army to victory against the barbarian tribes in Germania, which ends the war. So this relates to that quote you said earlier about like the final frontier. And so this is the world that he finds himself in, and so that's the ordinary world. Then you've got the call to adventure. Emperor Marcus Aurelius notices Maximus' strong abilities as a leader and chooses him to be the next protector of Rome over his son, Commodus, because he believed Maximus could turn Rome back into a republic. This is his call to adventure. And this is actually a Prezi that someone created. You have the link, so you could link to this. Yeah, if people want to see it. Refusal of the call. Maximus refuses the emperor's wish because he feels he is not qualified, but says he will give it some consideration. His intention is to return home to his wife and son. As we've said earlier, he doesn't want to do it, but he's feeling the urgency of it. Then we've got meeting the mentor. Maximus' mentor was Emperor Marcus Aurelius because he looked up to him and saw him as a father figure.
And he had actually a second mentor as well, which was the guy that owns him. His was a former gladiator, and says, if I wasn't the best because I killed quickly, I was the best because the crowd loved me.
Yeah,
and he mentors Maximus to be the next best gladiator.
I got a lot of Hunger Game vibes in this movie. Like a mentor, someone going into
the Hunger Games definitely has the
gladiator
the
type.
as well.
The heroes, there was a lot of same cinematic type of elements in this. But continue.
Keep going, John.
Yep.
Yeah. So next is tests allies and enemies, and Maximus is taken as a slave and becomes a gladiator. He fights in many trials at the Colosseum in Rome. His fellow gladiators become his allies. Again, they call him general when they're in the cage. Commodus wants him dead. So obviously the enemy is Commodus in this story. So next is approach. Maximus and other slaves are forced to become gladiators and fight in the competitions for entertainment. He begins to be known as the Spaniard. So we begin to see him kind of resurface again for who it's like a rebirth after going into the pit of his challenges. Then we've got ordeal, and there's different words used for the hero's journey. That's one of the things that I wish was more standardized. So you might find different words, but this basically is the same pathway. Maximus reveals himself to Commodus, who is unaware of him still being alive. He tells Commodus he will have his vengeance. This is the quote I just said a moment ago. He becomes a part of a plan to kill Commodus with the support of the senators and Commodus's sister. Then we've got reward. He is favored and highly respected by the people of Rome. They start to refer to him as the savior of Rome. Even Commodus's nephew says that. The road back, his allies are willing to help him take back Rome by fighting against the army to let him try to escape, but the plan fails. Resurrection is next. Maximus is captured and imprisoned. Commodus weakens Maximus by stabbing him, challenges him to a fight to the death. Maximus kills Commodus.
And Quintus lets him do it.
Yeah, that was an interesting change too. Because Quintus had betrayed him earlier. Had betrayed Maximus. Return with the elixir is the last stage. He orders for his men to be freed and that the Senate will take over Rome just as Marcus Aurelius wanted. Maximus slowly dies and joins his wife and son in the afterlife. So it's just amazing how clearly the hero's journey is embedded into these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about it. So every movie on the IMDb Top 250 has earned its spot there by resonating with something about the human experience. And that's kind of what we want to dive into and understand better. One thing that's been consistent is that these movies are a exploration and a dive into and trying to attempt to understand identity. And the hero's journey is very much a search for identity. Not all of the movies we cover have a hero's journey, but almost all of them have a search for identity.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the pieces of our, if I could just kind of speak to the culture of our church that I help lead, is our vision is to reclaim our identity in Jesus and to bear the torch of Christ's justice and love. And so it's this idea of, in order to know who we are, we have to reclaim our identity. As I said earlier, we are all made in the image of God. And so it's believing that there's this identity, and even Psalm 139 that we just read, that God stitched us together in our mother's womb. And so our journey is to reclaim that identity that he stamped onto our soul, and to recover who he designed us to be.
Yeah.
And so I think that parallels, again, all of these heroes' journey stories are echoes of that greater story.
Yeah,
that God is telling.
Yeah. One last thing I have here before we get into our wrap-up questions, and this is just really feeds into my economics wonkiness. So
What?
one of the slaves, when they're first put into slavery and sold off as gladiators, he says, "I'm a scribe. I write and speak in 7 different languages." So even from a purely naturalist worldview, if you believe there is no God, and you conclude, therefore, that there is no ultimate right and wrong in morality, you can conclude that slavery is misallocation of resources and inefficient. This man should not have been put into slavery as a gladiator for the simple fact that his skills laid elsewhere, and it would have been a more efficient use of his skills to use him as a scribe. And it's through free market trade and voluntary trade and cooperation that we find the appropriate price for such a person, rather than through slavery. There are some naturalists who would say that one of the big reasons that we shouldn't have slavery is purely because of a misallocation of resources. Very, very few people would agree with that. They think slavery is wrong just because it's by very nature wrong. And that exposes that the law of God is written on the heart of man. Because we know that slavery is wrong, without being able to articulate why, we can conclude that there's more than just a natural explanation for the world. Two fine points there, both my economics worldview and my religious worldviews.
Yeah. Well, and I would say because of the reason is the injustice, that it feels like it's unjust.
It absolutely is unjust.
Enslave a human being,
Yeah.
and God is a God of justice, and
Amen.
so yeah.
Should we get into wrap-up questions?
I believe so. It's about that
It's
time.
about that time.
All right. As we do every episode, we're going to sum this movie up with 4 questions, just to kind of give our listeners our idea of whether they should watch it or not. So the first one is, would you guys recommend this movie? Yay or nay?
Absolutely. This is definitely in my top 5 for sure.
I think I would. I think the visuals are absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unlike Oppenheimer, it's not breakneck pacing. There's a lot of moments where nobody's speaking, and not just because people are fighting, but reaction shots and panning landscape and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I would recommend it. It's definitely, I get why the hype was there for all the years that I haven't seen this movie and stuff, and it was entertaining to watch, and it was encouraging, and or I took away some things from it as well. It's it wasn't just entertaining, it was multifaceted as far as something that I spent time watching. I mean, it's not a short movie, so it's not time that I've thought was wasted. So I would definitely recommend it. I definitely would say I wouldn't let a 7-year-old watch it.
But maybe an 11-year-old.
Yeah, maybe a 7.5-year-old. No, it's definitely for mature eyes. It's pretty violent.
Yeah.
It's not the most violent thing we've seen on this list of movies, but it is pretty violent. There's dark elements. There's both. His wife and child are. You see corpses there, and there's familiar death and stuff, and it's not an easy watch in some spots. Yeah. It's rated R. Would you guys change the rating?
I actually would. I did watch it with my son, and I hesitated because of the graphic nature of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think, like you said about the nudity in Oppenheimer, I think there were some gore that wasn't needed.
Yeah.
There was only a couple scenes where, you know, someone's head's chopped off or whatever. I think you could easily insinuate that without showing it.
Right.
And then it could be PG-13 because there was nothing sexual in it. I think it was
No.
just...
And pretty
It was
clean
less-
language-wise, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think this works PG-13 just fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wouldn't take much to make a TV edit for this.
No.
In
No.
fact, I wonder if it was made today, if it would be PG-13. Because I think
it would be.
Yeah.
yeah.
Or they'd go a little bit harder and it'd be rated R still.
They would make it super
Yeah.
graphic. Yeah. Has it aged well? 23 years old.
I think it's aged great.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, I agree. I think when I watched it this time, it was a little slower than I remembered, but
Yeah.
probably just because of what we're used to in the modern pacing of movies. You know, that's interesting how you compare it to the pacing of Oppenheimer. I think we just don't have as much patience, or maybe we've been spoiled at how great movies have gotten.
We
and what
do get
expect of them.
pretty desensitized to stimulation, you know,
Yeah.
so
Well, I mean, we've
If
talked about
there's-
it before. Star Wars A New Hope, for its time, everybody's like, wow, that movie is breakneck pacing. And by modern standards, that's a slow movie.
it's a slow movie. Yeah.
Yeah. So but I think it still holds true. This is totally random, but talking about aging well, do you guys remember the movie Twister?
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
What?
Oh, dude, you
Yeah.
should.
All right.
I remember it's such a fun movie. I think it came out in '95, but I watched it with Noah recently. We've just been on this movie kick.
I love this.
And it was
Yeah.
fantastic. I'm like, it has some cheesy CG, but
Yeah.
you got to think about this as a 1995 movie.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that was really good.
They're making a sequel.
Are they?
I think I heard that. Is
They
it
are.
coming out soon?
2024, and it's called
Okay.
Twisters. So that's
Like Alien
and that's
Aliens.
not a joke. That is the title of it. So
There will
Nice.
be 2 tornadoes this time.
2 cows flying around.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do you know if any of the original cast is in it?
Well, the main guy has passed away.
Okay.
I can't remember his name, but the main actor in that movie. Let me look it up real quick. We have time
Is
here.
Kevin Bacon not in that movie?
Kevin Bacon is not. You're thinking of Tremors.
Which I've also not seen.
I have not seen that as well. I wanted to say something we talked about earlier about Ridley Scott and just how he's got a big collection of movies that are just very much in that same line of like
Epics.
identity seeking epic journeys. So Gladiator came out in 2000.
Yeah.
In 2014, he did the movie Exodus, Gods and Kings. So like I'm kind of curious, which I have no way of answering this question, but like
I never saw
I'm
that.
curious with the types of movies that Ridley Scott's done, if there has been some sort of coming to faith moment or like faith adjacent experiences to where he's had all these types of stories of identity and bigger than yourself type stories. And then he goes and does a movie like Exodus, which is straight out of the Bible. Now there were some things that weren't,
Interesting.
I'd be very interested to see like if any of these movies have impacted what Ridley Scott believes when it comes to life views, morality.
Well, I
and,
think you're
spirituality.
onto something because he also directed Kingdom of Heaven,
Oh,
and that has a huge moral theme in it. Like, do the ends justify the means?
Yeah, Kingdom of Heaven was
No.
5 years after. Was 5 years after Gladiator.
No, I think that's a
Sorry.
good question, Jeff. It does make you think about
Yeah.
the journey the directors are on, you know, in their own faith and how they weave that into the movies. Yeah.
I think it has aged well, and I think if any time a movie is getting a sequel, I think that tells you that it's got enough recognition or there's a lot going for it. Like a sequel, not a remake. Like the Gladiator 2 is a sequel, not a remake. So like anytime things get sequels, I feel like just in general, like that means like it's got enough prominence that's like, okay, yeah, let's keep it going. It's like, and I would agree with this. Like I think it's a great story. It's a great setting in history for storytelling. So like I do think like as for a period piece, like it's a very I think it has aged well. I'm glad they're not remaking it versus adding more to the story. Nelson, you look like you disagree with me.
I'm trying to think through my answer. Oftentimes I dislike a sequel.
I'm not saying the
But
sequel is going to be good.
I think you're right.
But the
fact
idea
that
of
they're making one means that it's
the first one still holds
it's
up.
got enough cultural importance,
Right.
that the studio says there's money to be found
Right.
here.
I'm not justifying sequels. I'm
you're
just
right.
justifying the originals that bring on sequels.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Then the last question here we have is, would this be in your top 250? I think we've all kind of answered this.
John,
I definitely know I know you've answered this. Nelson, would this be in your top 250?
I think so, but also if I didn't see it for another 5 to 10 years, I'd be all right with that. I probably won't watch it again until my boys are old enough to watch it.
That's fair. Yeah, I think this would be the top 250. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's historical, sort of like it's very interesting. The story's great. Like it's huge when it comes to scale. Yeah. I like big movies.
Oh, yeah.
When like just big worlds that you're a part of and stuff. Like, yeah, I think right now this would probably be in the top 250. We'll find out as this podcast goes on. But yeah, I think this is going to hold up.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I already answered it. But as we're talking, I'm like, why is it so high for me? And I think because I found so much of myself in Maximus that it really resonates with me. And the same for Cinderella Man. Like if I can see myself in these characters, there's a part of me that feels indebted to them for like helping to shape me. I know that might sound dramatic, but like, I want to be moved by a movie. I don't want to just be entertained. I want it to compel me and challenge me and make me think, and so to me, that's good art. And so I appreciate when that happens. And so in this movie, I'm not only inspired by Maximus, but I'm equally disgusted by Commodus. And I was just talking with a friend about this today, where there's a part of me that longs for the limelight, that wants to be famous or well-known or whatever. And I think that that's the Commodus in us, that wants that for our own reasons. And
it's the echo through eternity on the world level.
Yeah. So I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was Eric Peterson, who's Eugene Peterson's son. And Eugene wrote The Message paraphrase of the Bible, and he wrote a lot of other books too. But what impacted me was Eric said he was having a conversation with his dad, and his dad got invited to speak at this huge conference and be like the keynote speaker. And he was hesitating. Eric's like, "Dad, why are you hesitating? This is the opportunity of a lifetime, And Eugene says, "Son, look at me." And he looks in his eyes and he goes, "I'm afraid of losing my soul." And he never accepted a speaking engagement from that point onward to that, like to the masses. Like he would speak to smaller groups, but he never wanted that limelight to corrupt his soul. And that moved me so much that he was willing to live this quiet life and still have an incredible impact, on Christianity. But like, it really challenged me to say, would the limelight corrupt me if I was in it?
Right.
So I had said something earlier in this episode that I wanted to fact check as we close out here. Like, so Gladiator came out in 2000.
Yep.
The Patriot came out
95.
in 2000.
Oh, interesting.
And Braveheart came out in 95.
Yeah.
So these three movies that in my mind, before I'd ever seen them as a young kid, like they all like that I saw similar themes in. They did all come out within like a 5-year window. And The Patriot and Gladiator came out in the exact same year. So it was a good 5 years for movies of specifically even masculine journeys, and it was, so I didn't realize that they were that close. So I just thought that was fascinating. Wanted to kind of close that little thought out. But, John, is there anything you'd like to plug? Is there anything our listeners can, if you want to connect them to you, or is there any way they can do that? Or if you'd rather not, you can say not, but anything you'd like to put as we close this episode out?
Well, this relates to Gladiator, but I was just curious about Gladiator 2. And do we want a little teaser for it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you got?
So Gladiator 2 is based on years after the first film ended, where Lucius is all grown up and ready to embark on his own journey. So Lucius is
Commodus' nephew.
Yeah.
Same actor?
I can't tell.
Okay.
I'm curious. The official plot has not been released, but from the sound of things, the next Gladiator will largely focus on Lucius's life as an adult in ancient Rome. Now, I also saw something below that said, "Is Lucius the son of Maximus?"
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if this is a spoiler, but it says, as he searches for the truth about his biological father, discovering that he is, in fact, the secret son of Maximus.
Okay, because the movie does not say it hints that that Maximus and Lucius' mother were romantically involved.
You mean brother and sister? Wait, we're talking? Oh, we're not talking about
Commodus,
Commodus.
Maximus.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
But
yeah.
But there was
The
a
mo-
weird,
the
love
movie
scene there.
seems to imply that Lucius was after their relationships.
Yeah. So the actor is not returning for Gladiator 2. It's a different
So it's a different Lucius.
Different Lucius.
actor playing Lucius.
But Nelson, you'd appreciate this. The kid that plays Lucius in the 2000 Gladiator was in the Weird Al Yankovic
I
story.
know he was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Weird the Al Yankovic story. Such
Yeah.
a fun movie.
But that's an interesting story arc. So that'll be interesting to see how that is compared to the first one.
Yeah.
But also directed by Ridley Scott, so there'll be some hopefully
Continuity.
some cohesion between. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything I want to plug? I don't know. Yeah, I don't love self promotion, but I want to help people however I can, and so
We'll link below your
sermon.
Your sermon, so they'll be able to find your if they want to hear more sermons from you, they can find you there, and also the company that you started with Liz. If people want to find you in a professional capacity there as well.
So that's resilientcoaching.net, and you can link to that. There's also a part of our website that has some of my sermons on it, so that might be
perfect.
Two birds, one stone. But yeah, I mean, if someone is searching for help in terms of, wanting to work through some trauma or brokenness, wanting to look for a path forward, we love to work with people in terms of, helping them move forward stronger through life coaching. And, we really have a holistic process. So it's looking at how can you grow and heal spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, and relationally in all 5 of those layers. And we've seen so much success in looking at someone's story from those 5 angles, because oftentimes in treatment, you only look at one angle. So the church would only look at the spiritual angle. Psychology would only look at the personal level or even the relational level. But you've got to look at all 5 of them to have a complete restoration of the person. And so that holistic process has been really beautiful to walk people through and to help make some connections in their story. And so to me, it's really fascinating to kind of look at the science of their story. Real quick, I just one quick example. I had a client. She had incredible anxiety every February. It was every year in February. And so as we started to notice the pattern, I'm like, there's got to be something here. So we created a storyline of her anxiety, and we saw some very clear patterns and basically worked our way backwards to this traumatic event that happened when she was 11 years old in February. Like, it was that exact. And so, but it was almost like buried. Like, it was too painful for her to process the first memory until we uncovered all the other layers. And finally, she felt free to explore the origin. As soon as we uncovered the origin and made sense of that and connected it to her reality, the anxiety was gone. So it's not always that prescriptive, but in her case, we were able to make sense of her anxiety, and all of a sudden it didn't feel out of control anymore.
Right.
And so it was really, really, really powerful and freeing to watch her take hold of her own story and make sense of it, and then find freedom in a way of walking through her anxiety instead of just feeling stuck in it. So those are the kind of things that we get to do through coaching that I love to do. And so that's kind of my side job in addition to coaching, or in addition to pastoring.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for joining us. You brought a lot to this story that I think is really powerful, and I hope other people check out your work. I've had the luxury of being pastored by you in the past, and some powerful sermons. People at home, join us in a week. We're going to be covering our first foreign language film that isn't dubbed.
Right.
Das Boot.
Oh.
And, it's kind of interesting. So sometimes we record our shows out of order.
Yes.
Tomorrow night, you and I are recording Saving Private Ryan
with a return guest.
It'll be interesting in a week to cover Das Boot, which is still World War II, but from the German perspective a little bit. So please join us for those. I expect some great conversations.
Absolutely.
Out of that.
John, we'd love to have you back on sometime.
Absolutely.
You were a great guest. And honestly, like in the little couple minutes we have, like Nelson and I we know your wife as well. She would, if there's a movie on the top 250, and you can edit this out, Nelson, if you want.
No, I don't like women.
But if there's a movie on the top 250 that both of you guys are passionate about with what you guys do as far as a career and stuff, like, we'd love to get her perspective on something too, if that's an opportunity. So we'd love to have you back, and we'd love to invite your wife is back as well, if possible.
She's going to see Barbie tonight, so maybe if Barbie makes it on there, we'll see.
It could. Barbie is doing well as well, and my wife Lindsay saw it. She loved it. Barbie.
The top 250 skews towards male preference, so it'll be interesting if it does last.
Not too many women go out and rate the movie after they watch it. So it is. But Barbie did make almost double what Oppenheimer did. Did
it really? Jeez.
It did. Both did well, but Barbie exceeded Oppenheimer when it came to money.
Once again, John, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you. We hope to have you back.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you, sir.
Peace.
Thanks for listening. We had a great time putting this together for you.
To join the conversation, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Silver Screen Biases.
And on Twitter at Screen Biases.
We believe in value for value, so if you found value in our show, we ask you to consider supporting us.
Links to our social media and support can be found in the show notes.